On this channel, I often tell stories of ghosts, cryptids, and various other creatures and abnormalities. Sometimes it can be easy to forget that what we really need to watch out for and be cautious of is other people. Tonight, I will be telling 15 stories detailing different creepy encounters that can happen to anyone at any given time. I would like to thank the individuals who have been kind enough to share their experiences with the channel. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. Stories can either be submitted at my subreddit, r/slumberreads, or the email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Stay safe out there. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. So about 2 years ago, a friend of mine had moved into his own apartment. The sofa that was in it was old and worn, so he decided that he would try and find one in better condition. He asked me to help him look for one, as my dad had a van, and we would need to use that to transport the sofa. So we went on Craigslist to have a look at what other people had for sale. We came across one ad that stated a 3-seater cream leather sofa, great condition, free to first viewer. There was a picture of it, and it looked in perfect condition. Now the ad had been up for a week, so we thought that maybe it was already gone, and that they just hadn't taken the ad down yet. So my friend contacted the seller, and almost instantly got a reply saying that they still had the sofa, and it was available if we could collect it. I was a bit weary that it was still available. I mean, a free sofa in perfect condition that had been up for a week, and nobody has taken it yet? I thought that maybe there was something wrong with it that could only be noticed when viewing the sofa. That was maybe hidden from the pictures. It was a weekend, and we had no plans, so we decided that we would go and check out the sofa. My friend contacted the seller back and organized a time and place to meet up. They decided on a local McDonald's car park at 9 p.m, as the seller said that he was at work until 8 p.m, and would need time to get ready after work. The seller said that he would be driving a green Honda Accord with a trailer. So we pull up to the McDonald's car park at about 8:50 p.m. There was loads of people around, so we had no reason to think that we would be in danger or anything. At about 8:55, my friend got a text saying that the seller was about 15 minutes away, and they asked him to describe what vehicle we were in, so he described the van that we were in to him. About 5 minutes after we had texted the seller what vehicle we were in, an overweight man around 50 years old, with a gray scruffy beard and greasy gray hair approached the driver's side window of the van, which was my side, as I was driving the van. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt with what looked like food stains all over it, with black jeans with holes torn in them, and dried mud stains all over them, along with a pair of black steel toe cap boots, also covered in dried mud. He knocked on my window, so I rolled it down a bit. "You boys here for the sofa?" He said in a gravelly voice. It sounded like he needed a cough, but couldn't get it out. Yeah," I said to him. "Rob's car is broken down just down the road and his phone battery has died. I was with him and I walked up to get you guys. He's with the car waiting for AA, but you can come down and collect the sofa off of him." Me and my friend looked at each other, unsure what to think. "Can I get in the van and we'll go back to Rob together?" the guy asked. "How far down the road is he?" I asked before he replied, "Not too far, but I need to show you where to go." At this stage, my friend pretended to get a phone call. "Hello? Yeah. No way, really? We'll be right there," he said before pretending to hang up his phone. He looked at me and said, "We gotta go. My dad needs us to help him with his flat tire." I nodded, knowing that it was a fake call for us to get the hell away from this creepy guy. "We have to go now, but we'll contact you tomorrow about the sofa." The guy just stared at us as I rolled up my window and started to drive away. Me and my friend looked at each other. That was creepy. I got bad vibes off that guy. My friend said definitely. We decided to drive around the back of the car park to see if we could find out if the guy was up to something or not. We could see him standing in the same spot where we left him, and he was on the phone. He put his phone down, and about 2 minutes after that a car pulled up with 3 men in it, and he got in. My friend's phone started ringing and it was the number of Rob, the guy who was supposedly giving away the sofa. He answered. "Hey, can you meet tomorrow? And I can hold on to the sofa for you until then?" As he was on the phone, I noticed one of the men in the car that had collected the creepy guy was also on the phone. My friend told Rob that he would contact him tomorrow, that he was busy and couldn't talk right now. At the same time that my friend hung up the phone, the guy who was in the car also finished his phone call. At this point, I explained that to my friend that there was probably no car that had broken down, and that creepy guy was trying to lure us to something or somewhere, so the guys in the car could do God knows what to us. We drove home, and my friend blocked the number of Rob, and we never heard from them again. We reported the ad, and it was removed the next day. I was a high school student, living with my mother in a third-floor apartment. I used to sleep in the living room because the apartment only had one bedroom, and it was my mom's. I was happy with that little space I had. I was a happy kid. I always got up at 6 a.m. to go to school, and my mom always got up at 5 a.m. to have time to shower and make breakfast before dropping me at school and heading to work. That morning, I woke up and all the lights were on, every single one of them, even the one in my room. I went to grab my phone and it wasn't there. Odd. I headed to the bathroom and saw all the drawers and doors of every furniture we had were open. I was deeply confused. Anyways, my mom came out of the bathroom and asked me what the hell I've been doing. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, and that I thought she did that since she is always up earlier than me. I also asked if she'd seen my cell phone. Then I saw it, deep inside her green eyes, the realization. I could see the fear and all the pieces inside her head clicking in place. She leaped to the kitchen and found the window wide open, a kitchen knife on the ground, and some dusty fingerprints on the wall where someone put weight on it to climb inside. It was then, when my sleepy head put the pieces together too. Someone, somehow, climbed all the way up our balcony, got inside the apartment and robbed us, all while I was asleep in bed, right there in the living room. She hugged me and asked if I was okay. I said I never heard anything, didn't even wake up when this unknown person turned the lights on and rummaged through our stuff. It was super weird. I've had the lightest sleep since I can remember, and still do, many years later. They didn't dare to open my mom's bedroom doors so she didn't notice a thing. My grandma says that some angel protected me in my sleep and that's why I didn't wake up. But I don't believe in that stuff. I don't think they knew I was there either. Police never found the robber, and we put steel bars on the window. We moved anyways, sometime after that. This happened when I was still in high school. At least 6 years have passed. My mother and I moved from that apartment. Now I'm grown up and living with my boyfriend, but until today, I'm still paranoid and keep wondering why I didn't wake up, though I'm grateful that I didn't. This was some years ago. I was 16. I'm in my early 20s now, and I live in Egypt. Our manner of transportation here also includes a microbus, you can Google it, and a minivan or microbus, which is about 3 seats in front, 3 in the back, and the driver's seat. I was coming back from my high school with my certificate, and my father told me prior to get some specific bread from a supermarket that was 20 minutes away, so I thought, why not? I went to get some more bread and toast for me at the market. It was Ramadan, around noon, so I was fasting and thirsty. So I thought I might as well get a ride back home. I see the small microbus, and I wave and ask if he's going the same way as I. The driver says yes. As I open the door, I saw the first flag. They were seated in a very specific positioned way. I'm going to try to describe it, but please excuse me if I do it wrong. In the back seat, there's a guy on the left and a guy on the right leaving a seat in the middle. In the front, there was one guy sitting on the left. That leaves the middle back seat and middle and right front seat, which is liftable so you can get access to the back seat. The second red flag is that if I remember correctly, they were trying to avoid looking at me but not in a nonchalant way, almost on purpose. The third red flag is when I greeted them. They greeted me the same way back, almost in sync. My gut feeling at this point was telling me to run the hell away from there, but I thought I was just being a coward. It's noon, and I was a kid, and I didn't want to be judged or inconvenience the driver, so I took a deep breath and jumped in the back in the middle seat between the two strangers. The car took off, And I started to get out some money, and I asked the driver how much he wants. And then I saw him go beyond where he was supposed to go. In the middle of me telling him he's going the wrong way, I was interrupted by the front seats getting dropped by the dude in the front, and him sitting on it backwards to look at me. Guy on my right drew his gun and cocked it while the one on the left had his pocket knife in my hip. I simply panicked and started to say weird things, the usual in these situations like please don't harm me and such. And I more or less was just getting everything out of my pocket. I had a bad Nokia phone with a barely working screen, 13 pounds, which isn't much, but can get you a day's breakfast and a lot of bread. The guy in the front nodded at me as I gave him the phone, and I asked him if I can have back the SIM card, which he did give me back, and he gave the phone to the driver, who laughed at me saying something like, "Lucky son of a bee." This is where things take a turn for the funny. Not at the time, obviously. I had a gun and a knife at my hips. When the guy on the left saw how little money I had, he gave it back to me, and when I asked the front guy if I can have the bread, I have no idea why I asked him, since my father would kill me if I returned home without it. When they made sure I had nothing else, they opened the door for me, and the guy with the gun on my right told me to wait and asked where my wallet was. I don't carry a wallet, but I forgot that I don't, so I looked for it in my back pocket and didn't find it. I told him the other guy took it, and he basically picked a fight with him, yelling something akin to, "Did you snatch the wallet for yourself?" And when I finally got out, the guy with the gun said, "If you look back, you'll get shot." Obviously scared as hell I didn't. I walked the rest of the way home, shocked and scared to hell, but numb at the same time. When I got home, I cried and shouted my lungs out, and blamed my father, for no obvious reason. I was just scared. And he basically got dressed and told me to come to the police department with him. I was too afraid to go outside of my house, so I refused, and he went alone to report it. Later, he convinced me to go with him to look at possible suspects' pictures. I did not remember their faces, so I have no idea if their pictures were there or not. I was so afraid for years after that to get near any public transport, let alone deal with strangers. But I eventually got over my fears with the help of my friends, and I can go home around 2 or 3 a.m. alone. I also learned to never choose another person's feelings over my gut feelings. I'd rather be wrong and be a selfish a-hole than be in a compromised position, because all I kept thinking of was, what if I was a girl? What if they weren't just robbers, but something worse? I'm a 31-year-old woman. This happened a few years back. I was walking from a friend's house to meet my son's father, X, at a bar we frequented in those days. It was winter, icy, and snowing with giant piles of snow all around. I was walking from a friend's house around 9 p.m. down an alley that served as a driveway area for many houses. Not a great neighborhood, but not particularly bad either. I was wearing my apocalypse boots, waterproof, knee-high, winterproof. I usually have headphones in blaring music while I walk, but that night, for some reason I decided not to. In hindsight, it's probably what saved me. I'm about the equivalent of 2 or 3 blocks away from the bar. There's a younger guy, early 20s, walking about 50 feet behind me. "Hey you." I turn around. It seems he's talking to someone. "Hey." I look back, then continue walking. "Yeah, you. No, don't turn around, sweetheart." I start to walk faster as I realize he's getting closer. Ahead of me, I see an SUV running, backed out of a parking spot but blocking my path. I turn around. There's another guy. The door to the SUV opens and there's a couple of guys in it looking at me. One gets out and stands by the open door. I turn to look at the guy behind me. Out of nowhere, about 5 more guys come out, surrounding me from a distance, slowly closing in. The realization that they were hiding behind piles of plowed snow hits me. I realize they are just standing and watching me. A couple of them had their phones out and were recording something that was about to go down. Nobody was smiling, but they were closing in on me, trying to get me to walk to the SUV. Fight or flight kicked in, and I decided I didn't want to know what was about to happen. I wanted to catch them off guard, so instead of running forward, I bolted to the left. Thank God for those boots. I could run across the ice no problem. I ended up cutting through a few yards and luckily made it to the bar safely. Short background. I, 24 female, have been dating my boyfriend since I was 15. The first 6 years of our relationship had been kinda long distance. I used to go visit him on weekends, and it would take me around 2 hours by bus or train to reach the station, which he would come pick me up. This story takes place when I was 18, so I was quite used to public transportation by then, and I was aware of the creeps and weirdos one would encounter when traveling. Nothing really creepy had ever happened to me apart from the usual stares and unsolicited, "Hello, beautiful." One Saturday morning, I got on the usual train for the last 15 to 20 minutes of my trip, after traveling for 1.5 hours by bus. I always tended to seat either close to the other girls or to families with children. This one time the train carriage was quite empty, so I sat across of a young guy with flamingos on his t-shirt and a laptop. I don't really remember who the other people in our carriage were. That seat just looked like the safest one. Shortly after the departure, another guy entered the carriage and sat down next to me. He looked 25 to 30 years old. He was wearing some dirty old clothes, and he smelled like sweat and possibly booze. He said hi, and I said hi. As I wrote before, I was quite used to weirdos talking to me on buses and trains, so I didn't immediately feel like I was in danger. In my experience, it was usually better to engage on a short and meaningless conversation than ignoring them completely. He asked what my name was, and I made one up. Then he asked why I was traveling all alone, and I said my boyfriend was waiting for me at the following station. I hoped this would be enough to make him desist, but I was so wrong. He started telling me that he had just gotten a new phone, and he had lost all of his friends' numbers. He asked me to give him my number, so he'd have someone to talk to at night. I know, what the fuck. I politely declined. At that point, I was starting to feel very uncomfortable, but my stop was only 5 to 10 minutes away, and I still thought he was going to give up and leave. He insisted on me giving him my phone number and started getting closer to me. At this point, I stopped answering his questions and looked in the opposite direction. This must have bothered him because he suddenly put his dirty hand on my thigh to get my attention. I was terrified, but I managed to utter a shaky, "Don't touch me." I wish I had yelled it, but I didn't, and no one in the carriage noticed what was going on. Not even the flamingo guy who was literally in front of us. Or maybe he did notice and didn't care at first. The guy didn't take his hand off of me and I was petrified. I don't remember if he said something else at that point, because I was focused on his hand on my jeans. I gained some more courage and managed to tell him to leave me alone in a slightly louder voice. I guess that some people started looking in our direction in that moment because he suddenly got up and left. I started crying for the relief as soon as he exited the carriage. The flamingo guy asked if I was okay and if I needed him to call someone. I said I was fine. I tried to call my boyfriend, but he didn't answer because he was driving to come pick me up. I thought it was over. The train started slowing down and I got up in order to get off. Little did I know that the creepy guy was almost probably keeping an eye on me from the window of the carriage door after he left. I got off the train and started to look around hoping to see my boyfriend, who would sometimes wait for me on the platform. At that point, I noticed that the guy had stepped off the train as well. As soon as we made eye contact, he started walking towards me. I felt my heart drop. I turned around and started walking quickly towards the stairs, hoping he would lose me in the crowd. As soon as I reached the underground corridor, I started running. I got to the other side of the tunnel. I ran up the stairs and towards the restrooms. I don't know why I didn't run to the main hall instead. I was panicking, and I just went for the first place that came to my mind. I locked myself in one of the cubicles, made sure it was closed, and then got up on the toilet so he wouldn't see my feet. I was wearing a pair of quite recognizable boots. 20 to 30 seconds later, I heard someone come in and hastily try all the door handles. Of course, it could have been anyone, but I'm convinced it was him. It just made no sense for anyone else to try to open all the doors like that. I remember feeling my heart beat in my throat while I was waiting for him to leave. I remained still and silent for what felt like ages until I heard him walk away. At that point, I started crying again and finally managed to call my boyfriend and tell him I was locked into one of the toilet stalls. When he got there and I came out of the stall, I was shaking uncontrollably, but he somehow managed to calm me down. When we got out of the restrooms, there was no sign of the guy, and I never saw him again. Looking back now, I know I should have reported him to the authorities, but I stupidly thought that they wouldn't believe me, or that they were going to shrug it off as not a big deal. After all, nothing really bad had happened on the train, and I had no proof that it was him trying to open the stall doors. This experience made me avoid trains for a while, and even though after some time I managed to overcome my fear, I really hope I never meet him again. When I was younger, every year for Christmas I would drive upstate to my aunt's house along a stretch of highway. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of this road. All I know is it runs nearby Akron, New York, at some point. However, most of the drive is through rural areas, with little to no towns nearby. So, it was the dead of night and my groggy self had gotten off a long shift, and had to drag my ass to my aunt's house, since my extended family was expecting me the following morning. Near halfway through the drive, I realized I was low on gas, which irritated me. My brother told me he had filled it up the day before, so he either forgot, or he was straight up lying. I saw an archaic looking sign for a gas station off the next road. It wasn't an official road sign, literally a pole with a slab of metal attached with gas off next exit, or something along those lines painted on. That seemed a little sketchy, but people do the same thing with fruit stands on highways, so whatever. I pulled off the next exit on some dilapidated country road through dense woods. The whole thing was creepy and surreal. I kept expecting Leatherface to come running out of the trees with a chainsaw. Anyways, eventually I came to the gas station and realized quickly it hadn't been open for years. It was all rusted and the convenience store's roof was caving in. The gas pumps had all been taken out as well. I pulled over next to it and checked my gauge. I would probably only make it another half mile before running out. So I called AAA, and they said they'd send a truck over. Now I played the waiting game. I left my engine on because when the headlights were off, everything was pitch black and my paranoid self wasn't sitting next to an abandoned gas station in the middle of a forest in complete darkness. So most of the wait went uneventful until I sensed movement around the side of the old store, where my lights are pointed. I look up, but didn't see anything more, so I look back down at my phone. Then over the sounds of the night, I hear someone yell, "Hey buddy, come here," in a demanding tone. I look up, and I shit you not, there's a dude standing by the old store, looking towards me, illuminated by my headlights. He looked like the run-of-a-mill homeless guy. I was honestly spooked, and figured he must have been squatting there. Still watching him, I rolled down my window and yelled something like, "Yeah, what's up?" Still mentally crapping myself. I had my foot ready to floor it out of there at the first sign of trouble. "You got any change?" "No, I don't. Sorry, man." I look up at him. He has this kind of vacant expression and is standing stiff. Then I see more movement. There are heads, about 20 or so heads, peeking around trees beyond the man I'm talking to. I can't see them clearly at all, but they are definitely people. Literally just heads, staring in my direction from around the trees. I see another guy beginning to walk around the gas station, and then I turned around and sped off. I got as far away from that place as my tank could carry me, and updated AAA on my location. The driver came back over and filled me up, and I didn't say anything. But after he left, I wanted to call the cops, so I called the nearest town's sheriff department. They said they'd send a trooper over, and I gave them the location. When I got to my aunt's house, they called me back and said whoever was there was gone, but they could tell a large number of people had been living there for a while. Blankets, canned food, the usual. The whole situation still freaks me out, but frankly, I can consider myself lucky I'll always have a creepy story to tell. I'm just glad nothing bad happened. To give you a little background, I have a nervous tic where I laugh at the most awkward and inappropriate moments. I've always said that I would probably laugh even if someone is causing me physical harm. Now to the actual story. My family and I owned a small business in a not so great part of town. One day I was just eating my sandwich and watching The Young and the Restless as I did every day with a coworker. Also, we were only two there at a time. I looked up and saw a figure peering through the display window, but I just assumed they were checking out the awesome display my mom put in there, because sometimes people only came to see what creative display she had come up with that season. They suddenly open the door and shut it, and I thought, that's odd. So I stand up to see what's going on. That's when I see a tall figure with a full face bandana mask on with only eyes and a mouth cut out. He comes through the door and demands us to give him the money. Naturally, I freak out, but I have always been told to just give them what they want and don't protest to it, which is what I had planned on doing. Next thing I know, my coworker stands up and says run as she's running towards the back. So I was like, okay, and ran too. I went through the back door assuming she was right behind me, and I get all the way to the back of the driveway and turn around to see she's not there. So then I start panicking like, where is she? I'm just sitting there like a dumbass because honestly, I don't even know what to do at this point, and still trying to process what the hell just happened. I start walking down to the bank on the road beside us to tell them to call the cops since I left my cell phone inside. Then I hear a deep-voiced man say take me to the money in a hateful tone. I turn around, and there's a man pointing a gun at me, so I just say okay. Well, freaking out obviously, and go with him. I then start laughing like some kind of crazy person and he gets agitated. He then yells at me to walk faster with the gun pointed at my back, so I tell him I'm sorry. Which, why the hell should I be sorry? So I give him the whole $50 that we had in our register, and he takes me to the back and tells me to stand there and count to 20. So I do what he says. Then yell for my coworker trying to figure out where the hell she went. Like, did they have her or what? No worries though. She was safe hiding in the bathroom. The cops never found who did it, but they didn't actually seem too concerned since he only got $50. Never mind the fact someone had to go through a traumatic experience. Also a side note, I had posted on Facebook that I would probably say I'm sorry to someone even if they were trying to rob me 2 days before this happened. Luckily, this was a while ago, and I have less anxiety about it than I used to. Although, due to the virus, all of these people wearing bandana masks lately has me on edge. This happened 6 years ago, and will haunt me for the rest of my life. I grew up in one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in all of North America. The neighborhood was initially supposed to have 12,000 people, but by the time I was 12 years old, it had a population of around 30,000. It was one of Toronto's poorest neighborhoods, with 50% of the population being under the poverty line, though the crime rate was not nearly as high as you'd expect it to be. The neighborhood was mostly made up of immigrants and refugees looking to find a better life, my family included. It was summer break between 5th and 6th grade, and my cousins, who happened to live in the same apartment complex, were at our place watching movies. I was getting hungry, so I grabbed some money and headed for the convenience store to get snacks. It was around 7 p.m. so the sun was still up, and there was an hour and a half left of light. The convenience store was a half block away, so I walked it. When I got to the parking lot of the residential building the store was in, I noticed a man wearing a black hoodie with horizontal green stripes standing in the corner of the parking lot. There was nothing too noticeable about the man, except that he was smoking directly under a no smoking sign. Nothing uncommon in that neighborhood, just kind of ironic. I walk up the steps and into the cramped convenience store. There might have been 7 people in there, but it looked as if it was already almost full. Probably as big as a mid-sized apartment, and was already stocked up to the ceiling. Point is, if anyone enters, everyone in the store knows, so I come in. And directly to the left of the entrance is a shelf packed with many different varieties of candy. I was like any other child who has 20 different varieties of candy laid out in front of them, but only has the budget for 2, lost in thought. At the moment, I forget about the man who was smoking. He enters through the door. He walks into the nook of the store behind me, where they keep all the flatbread. I can feel his gaze on the back of my head. I quickly decide on the snacks, pay, and leave. I walk out, down the steps, and to the sidewalk on the other side of the narrow parking lot when I hear the chimes of the exit door. I glance behind me to see who is exiting the store, and I am a shade under petrified when I see the man exit the store, especially when I notice he is carrying nothing in his hands. I quicken my pace just a tad, and reason with myself that he just bought another pack of cigarettes and just put it in his pockets. That idea has barely crossed my mind by the time I am halfway back to my building. I turn around to see if he's still there. He's maybe 15 feet away from me when we make eye contact. He has his hood off, and I can see his face clearly. He looks to be Afghan. There were a lot of them since the neighborhood has a hotspot for refugees, and at the time, Afghanistan was doing really bad. He has scars covering his face and is balding on top. He couldn't have been too tall because he wasn't much taller than 6th grade me, so like 5'4" or 5'6". I spin back around and start to speed up, and I hear footsteps behind me quicken. By the time we get to the D-shaped driveway to my building, we were speed walking. Remember, it's broad day, and there are plenty of people around, and a man chasing a kid around is weird to anybody. As soon as we hit the split in the sidewalk which separates the driveway and the straight path, I start sprinting at full speed to my building. Luckily, there was someone buzzing in at that exact moment, and I slipped in the door behind him. I quickly whirl around and pull the pneumatic glass door shut. When I look up, I see the man, seconds too late, on the other side of the glass. The look on his face still scares me. He stared at me with an expression of anger I had never seen before, nor have seen since. I run to the elevators and push the button. He starts rattling the door. The expression on his face was still sinister. When the elevator comes, he understands that he won't catch me. He leaves the way we came. I live in a small town in South Africa. Near my town there is a large patch of woods, and since the outbreak of the virus, I haven't been in the woods for a long time. Until yesterday. So my friend called me to ask if I wanted to join him and a few other mates to play a game of paintball in the woods, and obviously, I was keen. I got my paintball gear and gun and headed off to my mate's place. There was 6 of us: Chase, Liam, Matt, Joey, Steven, and obviously me. We headed off to the woods but made a few stops to fill up on patrol and get some gas for the paintball guns. When we finally got to the woods, we parked the cars, got in our gear, and ventured out into the forest to find the perfect spot to paintball. Eventually we got deep enough into an area with sufficient cover and space to play a good game of capture the flag. We played a couple of games, and since it's winter, it got dark really quickly, but we planned for this and brought our flashlights and decided to play a couple of night games, which is extremely hard, especially in the forest we were in. During one match, Joey and I decided to sit out because we were both tired and just needed a quick breather, and the others continued to play from a significantly good distance away from us. While we're chilling, I was rolling up a joint. Yes, I'm a pothead. And Joey went to go take a piss a couple of meters away from me. While I was busy rolling, I had the flashlight pointing towards myself since there was no other light to allow me to see what I was doing and around me. It was completely dark. I couldn't even see 2 meters ahead of myself because of how dark it was. Suddenly I heard footsteps coming my way, but I thought it was Joey, and I soon realized I couldn't see any light from his flashlight, so now I was more vigilant, but still relaxed, thinking he was trying to play a prank on me or something. But the footsteps stopped a few meters away from me, so I lifted up my flashlight and pointed it in the direction where I heard the footsteps, and scanned the area, but just saw bushes and trees, and I just thought it might be Joey hiding in the bushes or behind a tree, waiting to give me a jump scare. Then I heard footsteps coming in the opposite direction, and when I looked, I could see it was Joey because he was holding his flashlight. That's when I stopped what I was doing and picked up my flashlight and paintball gun, and when Joey reached me, I whispered, "Bro, I think there is someone over there." And Joey obviously didn't believe me and just said for me to stop being such a baby. But he soon regretted saying that because I decided to do one last scan of where I heard the footsteps, and to my horror, I saw someone peeking and staring right at me from behind a tree probably 10 or 11 meters away from us. I shouted, "What the fuck?" And when Joey heard me say this, he looked at me and then where the man looked, and instantly jumped up picking up his paintball gun also. We stared at each other for at least 2 minutes, but it felt like forever, until he stepped out from behind the tree. He was a large man, at least 6 feet, and honestly filthy like he hasn't taken a bath in years. He was wearing baggy ripped up jeans and just an old dirty zipped up bomber jacket. Plus we could see that he was on something, or he was just batshit crazy, and he was holding something behind his back. He finally said, "What are you guys doing out here when it's so dark?" We couldn't even answer him because of the shock we were in. Joey stuttered with fear in his voice. "We were just leaving." But the man nodded his head in disagreement and said, No, you're not. Your friends are still playing the game. Felt a shiver down my spine. How about we play a game of our own while we wait for your friends? And that is when he showed us what he was hiding behind his back. It was a large machete. That's when I knew we had to get out of there. So I aimed my paintball gun, and in the toughest way I could muster up, I told him, "Leave now or I will shoot." Even though I only had about 6 or 7 paintballs loaded. And Joey did the exact same by aiming his gun at the man, even though he had no paintballs in his gun. But he didn't even flinch. Something that honestly made my skin crawl. He smiled and said, "The game starts now." And suddenly he rushed at us, so I told Joey to run while I fired my last shots at him. And luckily, I hit him in the head, which caused him to fall so that we had a chance to book it and link up with our friends. As soon as we started running, we heard his footsteps again and he was actually gaining on us. We could barely see, but we couldn't slow down because we knew what would happen if we did. So we carried on sprinting our hearts out until we heard other paintball guns being fired, so we knew we were close. Joey started shouting to get everyone's attention, and all of a sudden I heard a large thud. Joey tripped and twisted his ankle. I turned around to help him, and when I did, I could see the man running full sprint towards us. In that moment I thought it was going to be the end for us, but our friends heard our screams for help and rushed to us, and when they saw the man, they started firing at him, and he knew he wasn't going to be able to take us all on. He decided to turn around and disappear into the forest. We helped Joey up, rushed to get our stuff, and rushed to the cars. When we got to my friend's place, we helped Joey treat his ankle, and I proceeded to tell my friends everything that happened. Obviously, they were all creeped out. It's safe to say that the next time I'm in those woods, I'll be more vigilant. Since the moment I started working at this restaurant 6 months ago, the alleyway behind the restaurant has always given me an uncomfortable feeling. To gain a layout of this restaurant, it's located in the middle of nowhere, 5 minutes from the Mexican and US border, since we're located in the tip of Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. The alley itself is not located right behind the establishment. You must walk past its patio, then past our garage, until you reach the side back door that you have to prop open, as the door locks behind you once it's closed. During the day, I'll usually see people walking back and forth across the alley when I go to take out the trash. It's typically a safe location, though it is also prominent for its homeless population. They're usually harmless, despite a few that are noticeably mentally ill. My colleagues have even gotten to know a few, and have given leftovers whenever possible. I work as part of the kitchen staff at this restaurant, and most of the time will work past 10 p.m. At night, my boss usually never lets the women take out the trash just to be safe, especially a petite, 5-foot, Hispanic, 28-year-old female. Anyway, since the quarantine started, our kitchen staff has become quite small, so I'll usually help take out the trash with one of the other men working. This night was pretty slow, and my fellow coworkers and I were encouraged to clean up and leave early. At around 9:45, I decided to get 2 of the slightly full trash bags and take them out back myself, assuming someone will see my actions and take the other 2 after me. As I walked past the patio to the garage, my gut began to fluster. I got to the back door and paused. Maybe you should wait, I told myself, but the smell protruding from the bags was nauseating. I pushed the door and propped it open with a brick we usually kept nearby. The alley was dark and silent. The air felt menacing. The only light illuminating was from the bulb above the door. I walked quickly to the bins and lifted up the top and dumped the trash. Then slowly a man stood up from the other side of the dumpster. He wasn't very big, but he looked a lot older. He was sweating, but his demeanor seemed agitated. He must have been crouching and waiting for some time. I jumped back, holding my hand above my heart that seemed to be pulsing through my chest. The man looked at me, eyeing me as my steps moved backward. He shook his head, motioning me to stop. He was far too close for me to outrun him. I looked at his bushy dark brows and dark black eyes. Most of him were still cloaked in the night that surrounded us. His clothes didn't look homeless, but I still assumed he was, since it's common for him to be out here at this hour, usually waiting for food. I told him I had no leftovers, but he shook his head again and took out a medium-sized knife. My eyes widened as I took in a breath. The following exchange took place in Spanish, but I'll translate. I don't have my purse. I was working. I'm still working. "Just come with me," he said with his knife as a pointer. My mouth grimaced. Having no idea where this small amount of courage came from, I said, "My friend's coming over right now with the rest of the trash." "No, come now," he said more hurriedly and stepped closer, and I stepped back, speaking again with a little more tenacity. "They all saw me come over here. There's more trash and he's coming right now. He's outside right now. I just need to yell." "You're not going to scream. I'll gut you." To this day, I don't know what came over me, but I replied with, "Watch me." We looked at each other, daring each other. Then we both heard footsteps coming from inside the garage, and he ran past me. I stood there breathing again. I didn't know I was holding my breath. I turned to see my friend John come out the door. "We're almost done over..." He stopped after seeing my face. "What happened?" I explained everything as tears ran down my face. My friend decided to run down the alley to try to catch him, even though I told him not to. And that he's gone by now. It was about 5 minutes until he came back. John relayed to me that no one was around except for some homeless guys we were familiar with. He asked them if they saw anyone running from the alleyway, and they said yeah, but they didn't recognize the man. And he took off in the opposite direction towards the border. John took me back inside and told our boss what happened. They called the cops, whose station was pretty close by. They sent someone to patrol the area and gather a description from me, which I gave. My boss let me leave early and John walked me to my car. He told me it's too bad we don't have a camera back there. It would have been cool to see how I handled the guy. I smiled slightly, but my stomach was still in knots. He looked at me and apologized. I moved my hand to stop him and told him I'll be fine. Unfortunately, I still work there, but I've been excused from trash duty from now on. Obviously, they never found him. I don't want to think about what would have happened to me if I was more complicit. Something gave me the courage to argue back to him. And thank goodness that my friend came out just in time. When I was about 8 years old, my parents were going through a divorce and me and my older sister used to spend a lot of time at our grandparents' house. It's long, ranch-style home on a corner in a very nice neighborhood that's a 10-minute walk from a gas station, grocery store, and a few fast food restaurants. The streets are long and lined with well-manicured houses, cradled by big, scenic California Valley hills all around. We were never very wealthy, but my grandpa bought it as a fixer-upper many years ago, and the property value has skyrocketed since then. As you can imagine, it's a very safe spot. And although there weren't many other kids in the neighborhood, it wasn't uncommon to see neighbors walking their dogs or pushing a stroller down the sidewalk outside our house. Although my mom was especially protective all our lives, this particular neighborhood was densely populated, and my family knew just about everyone who lived there. She grew up in that neighborhood herself, so she was understandably trusting. She would once in a while let me and my sister walk to the Rotten Robbie gas station on the other end of the block to grab a snack. I would always get a ring pop, and my sister would grab a Three Musketeers before we made our way back home. My sister was about 11 at the time, and this small amount of freedom was a really big deal to us. Nothing compared to walking down that street all by ourselves in the summertime, laughing and joking around, a couple dollar bills in our pockets. Felt like I owned the world. The one oddity I ever noticed around the neighborhood was a small camper parked on the side of the road opposite to the gas station, right along the backside of the fence of another house. It sat there in the shade like a permanent fixture, all the windows constantly covered by opaque beige curtains. I can't explain why, but it always gave me this deep sense of foreboding when I'd pass it. I was almost positive someone was living inside it because, at times, I'd hear the air conditioning running as it sat stagnant in that same spot. The hairs on my neck would always stand on end as I passed it, particularly as I passed the camper door, and I'd always keep an eye on it for the fear that one day it'd swing open just as I came to pass by. I think what bothered me the most was a drawing taped to the door from the inside. It was extremely messy. A sketch of odd lines and a brown-colored pencil that was frustratingly indiscernible. I could see the outline of something, a vague shape, but could never make out what it was intended to be. I never had the nerves to stop and stare long enough to really investigate, but each time I walked by, I'd steal a glance. A year prior to the incident I'm about to describe, I was walking with my mom past the camper in the shade. We had just gone to the park nearby and, unfortunately, had to pass the camper before we could cross the street and continue walking. I didn't want to seem afraid, so I kept on walking right behind her and didn't object when she walked past it. This time, I felt a little more brave. I was frustrated not being able to decipher the drawing for so long, and while my mom was feet away, I stopped in front of the camper door and took a moment to really look at the drawing. Upon closer inspection, the paper was filthy. I remember doing a project in elementary school where we soaked printer paper in black coffee to make it look aged, and that's what it reminded me of. My mom walked on without noticing I'd stopped following her, but my eyes stayed fixed on the indistinct mass of dirt-caked scribbles until I could make out what looked to be a tiny, malformed face. My stomach turned. I immediately felt cold and disgusted as my eyes trailed over the rest of the image. I didn't know what kind of creature it was at the time, but now I can look back and say the drawing was a badly deformed fetus inside a mass of large, perfect circles like those made by a circular ring ruler. Its face was contorted as if in pain. It was so graphically disturbing, and seemed to portray this odd sense of suffering that stuck with me for days. As a child, I didn't know how to process it, and the mental image still makes me sick to think about. I'd never seen anything like it before. Adrenaline flooded my body, and my chest hurt with fear, but I selfishly thought of my glorious little trips for ring pops and said absolutely nothing as I followed behind my mom. This was, in retrospect, a classically terrible idea. It's one of those things you scream at main characters in movies for. Ever since my ill feelings towards the camper had been elevated by the drawing on the door, I thought about it every time we drove by. And about a month later, my mom once again graced us with several bucks and permission to walk down to Rotten Robbie and grab our respective snacks. I thought about telling my sister about what I'd seen on the way there, but she was older and braver, and I was terrified she'd make me cross the street with her to check it out. It was a bright, sunny day, and I told myself with false certainty that nothing was going to happen. If I didn't acknowledge it, maybe it'd go away. We walked past the camper, and it was thankfully uneventful. On the walk back, I was feeling more comfortable and was focused on fighting open my candy wrapper while my sister walked alongside me. We passed the camper a second time, but I didn't give it half as much thought as the first time. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I recall being interrupted mid-sentence as my sister softly yet firmly said my name. There was a distinct fear in her voice that immediately set me on edge, like a bucket of ice water. All my senses heightened, and I became aware of everything, including the sound of haphazard footsteps about 10 feet behind us. It was accompanied by a heavy rustling sound like a heavy backpack, and nervously, I half turned my head to look. A man with a long, unkempt beard, and wearing many layers of ragged clothing stood behind us, eyes unmistakably burning into our backs as he walked. His movements weren't normal. It was a drunken shuffle, like each of his feet were unimaginably heavy, and needed to be moved one grand effort at a time. His shoulders were skewed, head tilted downward with a strange arch of his neck. I could hear his shoes scraping the gravel with every step, but rather than seeming genuinely intoxicated, it was as if he was intentionally meandering our direction like a zombie with the direct effort to frighten us. Behind him, I saw the camper door was wide open for the first time in all the years we'd spent living there, and realized this was the man who had been living inside. "He's following us," I choked out, my eyes filling with tears. My mind was spinning as I stared straight ahead again, the wide street and sidewalks abnormally empty all around. My sister grabbed my hand. She squeezed it hard enough to hurt without looking my way, speaking carefully under her breath. On the count of 3, we race home. She told me in a very serious tone of voice. I couldn't reply through the growing lump in my throat, but every single cell in my body understood we had to put some distance between us and this man as quickly as possible. She began to count steadily while we walked faster, and the most terrifying part is that he started running before we even had a chance to. He must have heard her directions to me and tried to get a head start by sprinting our direction before she got to 3, but his footsteps were noisy and we bolted like deer the instant we heard him behind us. I'll never forget it. The chase felt exactly like you imagine in your nightmares. The fear your pursuer is inches away from grabbing your arm or a fistful of your hair. I pictured myself being dragged into the van with nobody around to see or hear me. We ran so fast we didn't even have the breath to scream, and peering back behind me, about 10 seconds later, I saw him running our direction with absolutely none of the impairment he showed with those zombie-like steps moments before. I think back on it now, and he may have been deliberately pretending to be handicapped to lower our guard so we wouldn't start running. The thought is terrifying, but I can't rationalize it any other way. We made it to our grandparents' house, and, without looking behind us, yanked open the stubborn old door before slamming it closed and scrambling past their excited dogs to get as deep in the house as possible. I don't even think we locked it, as our main goal was getting within the line of sight of any adults as quickly as possible. My mom was talking to my grandpa at the table and gave us an amused look when we bounded into the living room. Since we were kids, running around wasn't anything out of the ordinary, and she didn't ask what happened as we collapsed on the couch and tried to catch our breath. The inside of the house felt so safe, and felt in such good spirits that I didn't even want to bring up what had just happened. Like waking up from a nightmare you didn't want to talk about. I was desperate to go back to normalcy. I wanted to forget it entirely, to unwrap my candy, and act like everything was completely normal for the sake of my own sanity. And that's exactly what I did. I asked my sister a few years back if she remembered this incident. I'm 25 and she's 28 now, and her response was strange. She remembered immediately without the need for me to provide details, but she quickly waved it off and insisted he had to have been a bored homeless man looking to spook some kids walking home with no real intent to harm anyone. I don't know. I'd like to believe it's some innocent misunderstanding, but like they always say about gut feelings, they're rarely wrong. I feel in my soul that he wanted to hurt me and my sister that day. I never told her or anyone else about the strange drawing on the door, and I'm not sure if my sister saw the open door and connected him to the camper or not. It's one of my biggest regrets, as I would hate for any other children to have been less fortunate after innocently walking past the camper in the shade. I believe he may have chosen the spot between the park and gas station deliberately, due to the number of children walking around the area. I never saw the camper again, a day or so after this. I'm not proud of how I handled this, and would encourage anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation to contact authorities immediately for the safety of others around. I don't know. Maybe this whole story comes off as melodramatic, but it was very real and very frightening in a way I can't forget. When I was a teenager, my older brother moved out and my parents both worked late, so occasionally, I would spend evenings by myself after school. We lived in the countryside a few miles outside of town and had a good collection of neighbors. The day went as normally as ever. I went to school, got home, turned on the TV, had a snack, and texted one of my friends who I had a crush on. It wasn't long afterwards that I noticed a man outside my house. He walked past a few times. He wasn't an ordinary person walking around the block. He looked scraggly and unkempt. I ducked as far as I could behind a chair, still trying to see him out of the living room windows, hoping he didn't see me. But soon he came to the front door and knocked. I was texting my friend the entire time, increasingly getting freaked out. As he knocked on the door, I stupidly went to answer. I had my phone on me with 911 at the ready. I tried to silently unlock the door to not alert the man. I opened the door a crack. There was a screen door separating myself and the man. I was ready to slam the door and lock it if anything happened. The man looked at me with crazed, paranoid eyes. He had a large dark beard and looked to be late 50s, early 60s. He seemed out of breath and his face drenched with sweat. He was larger too. More the reason to keep my guard. I sheepishly said, "Hello?" "Please, call the police. They're after me." He said in an exhausted smoker voice. He kept looking at the road and tensed whenever a car would occasionally pass. "Who's after you?" I asked, getting ready to slam the door. I barely escaped. They were right behind me. "Please, can I come inside?" At this point, I knew to call the police. "Just wait here. I'll get someone to help." My heart was in my throat at this time. I didn't know if this guy was then going to try to force open the door, so I quickly shut it and locked it. I ran to the back door and locked that as well as I called 911. My heart was racing and I could barely tell the operator my information, but they said they would send somebody out. It wasn't long until a patrol car arrived, but it felt like forever. The entire time I kept watching the man who then walked into my driveway, pacing nervously. The officer got out and proceeded to talk with the man, and they got in the car and left. I have no idea what happened to him, nor if he was telling the truth. He could have been drunk or crazy, but it was genuine fear in his eyes when I looked at him. Something truly scared him, and it scared me to think that there could be someone out there that wanted people for whatever reason. This happened about 2 years into our now almost 9-year relationship, and it still gives me chills when I think about it. My partner, Ron, and I had just pulled up to his mom's house after a date night, and we were in the middle of saying our goodbyes. For context, his mom's house used to be in a quiet, residential area surrounded by busy main streets and a random freeway entrance 2 blocks over. We were not parked more than 5 minutes when a man come running from the house next door up to our car with a flashlight, tapping on the passenger window, motioning for us to lower it. Needless to say, we were both a little freaked out as he appeared out of nowhere and refused to lower the window, especially considering we did not recognize him. He tapped harder this time, and Ron told me to just drive around the block until he went away. So I drove down the end of the street to put some distance between us and the man. That's when we see him jump into a car and drive full speed towards us. Panicked, I make a wide right turn into the main street, so that I am in the left lane. The dude does the same, except he pulls into our left in the middle of oncoming traffic. At this point, I'm hysterical, and Ron and I are trying to rationalize what is happening. When I catch a glimpse of his face, he seems so angry and I realize he's screaming something at us, but I can't make it out. So I make an asshole maneuver in front of the car on my right to dart down the next residential street. We thought we had lost him, but he came flying down behind us, only to pull up on our left again, screaming at us to get out of the car. While this is happening, Ron has the police on the phone trying to give them details about the car and the man driving. I, on the other hand, step hard on the brake and reverse it all the way back down the block to get away from the man. He must not have seen it coming because he seemed to stall for a minute. We were hoping that was the end of it, but he chased us down that street too. I realize the freeway entrance is only a block over now, so I hightail it, running a red light in the process, and pull onto the freeway at the last minute. In the rear view, we see him stop abruptly and stare at us while we zoom down the freeway. With the police on the phone, they explain that they'll send out a patrol to scope out the area for a car of that description. Not sure that ever happened. I drive until I was sure he wasn't following us, and we were far enough away from Ron's mom's house to call my parents. We pulled into a Rite Aid parking lot and waited for them to come get us while I am just crying hysterically. That night, my stepdad drove over Ron back to his mom's house, where they saw no sign of the man. The next day when Ron told his family what happened, they went next door to confront the neighbor about it, only for the neighbor to explain that they had no company over that night, did not recognize the car, and didn't know anyone of that description. A little about me. I'm a personal trainer, and I share a space in an office that also has an acupuncturist and a chiropractor. Usually they operate during the day, and I will go around 7 to 8 p.m. at night to work out and do heavy lifting so their clients don't have to hear metal clinking or banging in another room. As a preface, every once in a while the door will unlock and a cleaning person will come in. The door will chime, and they will clean and leave. The family that cleans the building is Hispanic. Usually a taller man who is very nice will clean our office, and a woman I assume is his wife will walk around with a trash bag and pick up the other buildings in the area. Tonight was the usual routine. Go to the office, drop off some paperwork, and squeeze in an evening workout. I'm putting away some stuff and printing off a few things, and I hear the door unlock. The door is older, and it makes a very distinct clink sound when the key turns in it. The door chimes, and a man comes in, asking me in Spanish if he can come in. I don't speak Spanish, and he repeats in English, "Can I come inside?" Of course, I think it's one of the members of the family to come clean, and I say yes. It isn't until 10 minutes later that I go to throw away something. I notice the trash is still there, and this man is just sitting in front of the door. I don't want to be rude, but I didn't understand why on a Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. this guy is just sitting here in the office alone with me. I text the chiropractor and tell her what's going on, to which she calls me immediately and says, "You need to leave. There's a button on the alarm to notify the police. Do you want me to come over?" I tell her yes, and I grab my stuff and approach the man. I tell him I'm leaving for the night and turning on the alarm, so you need to leave. He looks at me and shakes his head and says no very firmly. I freeze up, thankful that I still have someone on the phone. I say, "Why are you here?" He mumbles something along the lines of, "I'm on probation." I tell him that the office isn't for probation, and in my mind, I'm thinking, why would someone be reporting to an officer at 8:30 p.m. on a Sunday? The office is holistic. We have Buddhas and incense around. It says Oriental Medicine on the door. He stands up and blocks the door. He starts asking what the office really is, and I tell him it's for an acupuncturist and other specialties. As I type this, I wonder why he cared to know. It wasn't for probation. Why would he care so much to know what the office was? I wonder if I made a mistake in telling him. He then pulls out his phone and begins to scroll through it. He says he doesn't know the address and maybe I can help him, suggesting I walk over to peer at his phone. I tell him I can't help him and he needs to leave. He scrolls for 5 minutes on his phone, and at this point I'm hoping the Chiro will get here soon. He holds his phone up at me and shows me a random list of 20 to 30 addresses. I tell him, maybe what you were looking for is across the street, but not here. You need to leave. He seems hesitant to leave, but finally turns around and walks out slowly. As soon as he gets outside, I lock the door. I guess it didn't matter because this man somehow had a key to get in, but I locked the door as soon as I could. It was only then that I noticed there was a van parked in front of my car outside. This man gets in the passenger side, so he isn't alone. I decide to wait until the car leaves before I get in my own car. The way they parked, it would only take them backing up 5 feet to box me into the space. The van is huge with suicide doors on the back, and it then proceeds to wait for 15 minutes before slowly pulling out. It stops in front of the office, as if they are taking one last look at the building and slowly pulling off. I wait, and notice that they have only pulled up 50 feet, just out of my sight. They're still there, and I can barely see the headlights. It's like they're waiting for something. Thankfully, the chiropractor pulled up in her car in time, and the van was gone. The whole experience was unreal. I can't seem to wrap my head around it. The fact that this man came in with a key and acted like he was there for probation doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. The fact he wanted to know what the office really was, and he blocked the door, is also bizarre. A few weeks ago when I was moving equipment into the space, I felt like I was being watched. I ended up burning some sage and thought maybe I was just paranoid about being in a new space at night. But now I'm wondering if there was something I was picking up on and didn't know it yet. I'll keep this updated as things progress. Hopefully that man doesn't come back in, and hopefully we get a security camera installed and the locks changed. To preface this, I was young, maybe 18 or 19, and had no idea what we were getting into. So my father owns 3 businesses and was actively dating his business partner and was providing for her. She also made advances on me, which kind of creeped me out. She would buy us all food, and at first, I was grateful. But then I started becoming nervous as she wanted to be alone with me a lot. My father ended up getting married, but didn't tell her, and she got really upset at him and told me not to tell her. She came to my job and demanded to see my father, to which I told her he wasn't there. She screamed at me and said we would soon regret it. Due to the disturbing nature of it, I called the cops, and all they did was take my name but didn't actually look into it. So fast forward, I come home around midnight, as I had just come from my second job, dead tired from school and work. I ate and crashed on my bed. It had to be at least 3 in the morning when I heard my door open. At first I didn't move because I assumed it was my calico cat, Misty, pawing at my door, as she liked to sleep with me. When I groaned her name and she didn't answer, it struck me strange, but I wasn't worried until I felt a presence standing over me. I quickly woke up and discovered my father's ex in our house above me with crazy eyes. She was screaming, saying how she would get her revenge on my father. I quickly rolled out of bed, ran past her, and called the authorities. She openly tried to fight my father's wife and tried to stab my dad. The police came and arrested her on the spot. That was the scariest thing I've ever been through, and I'm glad I won't see her again. Now I sleep with a blade next to my bed and a taser. Please be careful, as you never know who may pay you a late night visit.